I was booked sometimes 6 weeks in advance. And I didn't have much of a life beyond that. I was invited to great parties, and I just I couldn't go to. And I regret that. I regret not making the time to enjoy myself in those crazy busy years.
Today we've got Dave Calver on the line, and I'm really excited because we have yet to interview someone that I would consider has devoted the majority of their career towards illustration for things like poster design and magazine design.
The bread and butter really was editorial work, newspapers and magazines. Well, actually, I did a whole lot of book covers, especially murder mystery covers in the 80s and early 90s. But most of my work was editorial or book, with the occasional poster, primarily kind of traditional standard editorial and book.
We've generally gone digital and kind of contemporary, so I'm excited to learn about how you got started in your career and what are some of the takeaways that we might have along the way. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you can tell the listeners, how has your career been defined so far, and how would you define yourself as an artist?
Well, it's really changed over the years. I've been doing this for almost 40 years. I graduated from Rhode Island School of Design in 1976. And it was a good time to get into illustration because it was really beginning to explode in a way. It was a good time for different styles. It had been a little more traditional up to that point, and the market seemed to be ready for more stylized and variety of new looks. And I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and illustration at that time was kind of looked down on as sort of what you did if you couldn't make it in fine art. And I think there's still a bit of that, although things really changed in the 90s and 2000 or so with the advent of lowbrow and pop surrealism and galleries that embraced the illustrated image and kind of bridged that gap between traditional illustration and fine art. But at that point, it was just at the beginning in the late 70s of artists that were doing illustration. I kind of lucked out, and as soon as I graduated from RISD, I got work. And I had shown my portfolio to 3 places on spring break back then, and it was Esquire, New York Magazine, and this really cool magazine called Viva. And all 3 loved my stuff, and I actually got a job for Viva before I even graduated. Anyway, then I moved to Manhattan from Providence in late 76 and lived with 2 friends from RISD, and I lucked out again. I took a job at Macy's doing some of their small windows in the main entrance on Herald Square, which was so much fun. It was not mannequin stuff. They were small, and I got to do sculpture, and anyway, it was a whole lot of fun. And I did that only for 3 or 4 months because I started getting so much illustration work that I realized I could do that full time. So I did a whole lot of work for New York Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, trying to think of other, GQ I worked for quite a bit. Anyway, I started getting a lot of regular work for about 3 years and decided I'd had enough of Manhattan and moved to my hometown of Rochester, New York. And once again, I lucked out because it was the advent of it sounds ancient now, but the advent of the fax machine, and FedEx was really starting to explode. So I could fax my roughs to clients anywhere, and then FedEx the finish overnight. And so I was able to make a good living right off the bat starting in, I think, 1980.
I'm just grinning ear to ear here because I can only imagine how cool it must have been being in New York in the sort of like mid to late 70s, just out of art school, and got a paid gig, and all of a sudden you're getting like lots of illustration work. So you had money to burn, and I don't know, it just must have been an awesome time.
Well, I didn't have money to burn, really. Actually, the first 3 months were pretty painful. We were really very poor. Luckily, I had my two friends who were still my dear friends, Hoke and Claudia from RISD, and we went through it all together. And I had a big box, I guess, of potato buds that I had gotten from my grandmother when I had visited her. And Claudia and Hoke had a ton of tomatoes from Hoke's mom's garden, and we made so many meals out of tomatoes and potato buds. So we were really pretty poor to begin with. But you're right, it was a really exciting time because New York was not the New York that it is now. It was scary. It was dangerous and exciting. I luckily was never mugged, but everyone else I knew was. And we actually lived in Brooklyn. We lived in Park Slope, and it wasn't far at all from Manhattan, 20-minute train ride. But it was a real exciting time. CBGB's was going, and Mud Club, and the East Village was really hopping. And there was this great place called Club, I've forgotten the number, Club 57 or something, that would have these really oddball events like professional wrestling, in this really small venue. There was just a lot of really crazy things going on, and lots of artists because it was so cheap to live there then. And a lot of people that I went to college with were there. It was a really exciting time. And I was only there for 3 years, but another dear friend from college had a loft in Soho, and I would stay with her whenever I visited. So I was there regularly through the 80s, which continued to be a pretty great time to be in New York.
You said that you'd quickly gotten enough illustration work, or you're getting really busy with your illustration work. Were you doing something special that allowed you to be getting consistent work? The times are different, but were you hustling a lot to meet a ton of people and get your portfolio in front of as many people as possible? Or was it just that the work spoke for itself and that's how you're able to continue to get illustration work? Or what do you feel it was? And I'm asking for the person maybe today that's struggling and trying to get their work out there, or trying to get something consistent happening, and seeing if there's any parallels for what you did to what somebody might do today. Those
are really good questions, and I am struggling myself to promote myself and fit in the illustration world now after all these years. Back then, I did hustle. I was motivated, and I had a good portfolio. Back then, you had to bring your physical portfolio to places, and there was one day a week where you could drop it off, and there were all these tricks where you could put your zipper in a specific spot and know when you picked it up if it had even been opened. But I was hustling in that I was bringing my work around, but I had a pretty distinct style that luckily I was able to refine and evolve as I was working. I was encouraged, I guess, or knew enough to try and draw from inspirations from different artists. And I was shooting from fine art and from filmmaking. I was kind of influenced by a lot of German expressionist films and industrial stuff, deco to an extent. My stuff has really changed over the years. It was kind of severe back then, and over the years I've gotten away from it a little bit, and that back then I was using a lot of wet medium, and it had a lot of life to it. And I just kind of kept refining those very specific influences into something that was more my own. I think initially the arty quality, sort of unusual severity of it, really, and styling my characters and surroundings appealed to art directors. Like I said, as I continued working, I refined it and evolved it into something that was more mine. It ended up being a pretty appropriate look for the 80s. When I look back at some of my stuff, it's some of it's very 80s, and at the time it was just very me, kind of influenced by some of the other things that were going on. There was a furniture and design movement called Memphis that was very pop and primary colors, and I think of that as being very 80s looking now. And I think my stuff had a similar quality. Not necessarily inspired by Memphis, but it was just something that we were both doing at the same time. Memphis is much better known than I am, but there was a real look that came out of the decade that I think was kind of unusual and still has its own look to it, for better or worse. It's certainly not all good.
I have something more, something none of your dry as dust professors and routine-ridden doctors have. Love, devotion, passion.
You touched on another thing that I think is really an important question, and one that comes up a lot, and that's people wondering about finding their own style or their own voice or their own vision. And you have just talked about how you continue to refine your style and it became more and more you over time. Is this something that you intentionally did, that you said, okay, I'm going to take a break and work on my style? Or
No, not at all. That's a really good question. It just evolved. I was getting further and further away from my initial inspiration and just naturally falling into a revised version. And I was getting so much work that it was almost happening on its own. So it was not really intentional.
What are you working on now? Can you tell us a little bit about, from all, the 40 years of experience, what are you working on today, and what's
Sure.
what do you focus on now?
Well, it's been a really interesting journey. Things started to slow down a little bit with illustration for me right around 2000, 2001. And it was shortly after that I moved to California. And I hooked back up with a good old friend, Brad Benedict, in LA. And Brad is a real interesting character, and I'd encourage everyone to look at some of his books. He was one of the very first ones in the 80s to treat illustration as art, and published a lot of different books, such as phonographics, that was album covers. He did one called Fame. He did one called The Blue Book. And they featured his favorite illustration on various themes that he presented as a collection. It kind of preceded American illustration. Well, it preceded a whole lot of things. He had a show in Tokyo in 1984, I think it was, that was perhaps the first lowbrow pop surrealist show ever. And I was lucky enough to be in that. Anyway, I hooked back up with Brad in 2005 or so, and he was encouraging me to start doing gallery work. So I did, kind of took my illustration the next step in that direction, and it seemed like a very comfortable fit. I've always done this one character, for instance, this wide-eyed girl that became a staple of pop surrealism with other people. Not that they necessarily took it from me, even though I was doing that character back in my very first job for Psychology Today. I featured her in 1976. But Mark Ryden has done, but he's incredible. He certainly is doing the wide-eyed girl. Carmen Rose Garcia, I think her name is doing it. And so in that respect, it was a comfortable fit for me, doing a lot of things that I had already done with the freedom to do whatever I wanted with them. So I've been doing gallery work here and there. And at the same time, as illustration has really not completely dried up, but slowed down, I've been working on a graphic novel for 3 or 4 years now, and it looks like it may actually happen. It's been a lot of work. It's been a struggle because I've not done a lot of sequential work before, but I'm almost done with this first one, and it's a major publisher is very interested and waiting to see the most recent version of it, which I'll be ready to send in a week or two. But they've been working with this character, Craig Yo, is another one. I would encourage everyone to look at his site, Yo Books, Y-O-E Books, and he does amazing compilations of mostly vintage comics, kind of cult comics. Craig has been, I reconnected with him at Comic-Con just a year or so ago, and he's been coaching me on it. So that's mostly what I've been working on, although oddly enough, I've been working on a movie also, which Palm Springs is a great place to be to make that happen and to meet people to help facilitate it. But working on the graphic novel has been a tremendous help in looking at the movie and trying to structure the movie. So there are a lot of similarities between the two. I've also got a line of character shoulder bags that I've done. I've been doing a whole lot of other things, still illustration, which I love doing, but because I've had the time, I've been working on things that I've always wanted to, and it's really worked out well. Not so much financially yet, but I'm feeling really good about what I've been concentrating on that is not illustration. I'm pretty confident that both graphic novel and the movie will happen.
I like that. And I could hear like an uptick in your voice when you're talking about how you're enjoying spending time on these things now. You still enjoy the illustration, but you now have time for the things that you didn't have time for before. Do you regret not spending more time on these other projects when you were younger and just focusing on the illustration so much? Like, do you wish you could have gone back and done gallery work early or had a few side projects on the go?
That's a really good question. And no, I don't. I did do some shows, but mostly with illustration work. I was crazy busy for 5 to 10 years. I was booked for sometimes 6 weeks in advance. And I didn't have much of a life beyond that. I was invited to great parties, and I just couldn't go to. And I regret that. I regret not making the time to enjoy myself in those crazy busy years. Aside from wishing I had more of an income, I feel very fulfilled with the directions I've taken over the past 2 or 3 years. And film in particular is so foreign to me. It's been a challenge, and the graphic novel too, but the film in particular is so much fun to approach with no background whatsoever in it. It started out very tonally. I had the look of it really early on. I've kind of tricked myself into writing it as well as the graphic novel just because I've come up with these pretty resolved stories over the past 3 or 4 years, really, and so vividly done in my head and in some instances in storyboarding and sketches that really the dialogue in the story has written itself, and it's been a wonderful experience because I never would have imagined that I'd be doing it. But it with the movie in particular, it's very, very much inspired by where we're living right now, and that never would have happened if the events that preceded it had not. If we were still living in a house and in a new tract, which is where we moved to when we first were here, this movie never ever would have happened. We're living in this amazing vintage mobile home park behind Ace Hotel, and It's just fantastic. We love it. We never would have imagined being here. We moved from Rochester, where we had 4 acres and a 1940 Tudor, to this wonderful old mobile home. And it's got a real storybook quality to it, almost like a little beach town scale-wise. And because of the look of the place and the people and the drama that goes on here, it's what made me want to do the movie, and it's turned out to be a blessing.
I think it, I breathe it. Look out at the rain. Where anybody sees only a drop of water rolling down the window, I see a universe of beings animated with all the passions common to physical life.
I was going to ask about the transition from being in Rochester to Palm Springs, because I feel like different opportunities are in different locations. And
yes.
If you're not in the location, it doesn't exist. But it sounds like the movie didn't come necessarily because of your proximity to Hollywood and Los Angeles. It came more because of your just changed environment. And
it's true.
You're more inspired, or maybe not inspired isn't even the right word, but there's just a different energy for where you're at right now. And that, from that, that helped something new come out of it.
I think that's it. You're right. All my life, I think, in a way, I've been trying to have this sort of perfect house and gardens, and I kind of had that. We had that in Rochester. It was really very limiting, and it, like you and I talked about earlier, it only underscored the loneliness of what I was doing. And being here in this mobile home park, everyone's really pretty much on top of each other, which is, not always good. But there is drama here and there and some extreme characters. It's funny, when we first moved in about 5 years ago, it was a little rough around the edges. And now it's getting nice, which it isn't. I mean, that's a good thing, I guess, but I'm so glad we were here, kind of like in New York, I mean, when I was there, it was very funky and dangerous and incredible. I think in many ways preferable to the way it is now, certainly for an artist. And here, for the movie, I had hoped to film a great deal of it in the clubhouse, which had a charming little stage with a bingo ball, on it. And that's all been changed and upgraded, and it's really nice now. And so I've got to go elsewhere for that. And in fact, I found an alternative place easily enough. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It really stirred things up, and we had great friends in Rochester, but we've got new great friends here. Well, a whole lot of people in this area have retired here from LA and from the business. One of our dearest friends is a movie director. He did the original Muppet movie, Jim Frawley, and he's been a tremendous inspiration, as has this wonderful friend, Suzanne Perry, who used to have a mobile dog grooming service to the stars. She met a whole lot of interesting Hollywood people doing that, but she also happened to represent the vixens from Russ Meyer films. In particular, she represented Tura Satana from Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. It's just a whole other world here. There's a vibrancy and creatively, there's a lot cooking here. It's easy to find interesting people. We've been very lucky in hooking up with people that we love and that are very inspirational.
I think this has been a great story from the very beginning through to the end here.
Great.
Dave, why don't you let people know where they can find you online and look at some of your work, or get in touch if they would like to?
Oh, thanks so much, Mitch. Yeah, I've got a website, davecalver.com. My email is dcalver@mac.com. And I've got a whole lot of stuff on a site called Illoz, ILLOZ. And you can just get on illoz.com and do a search for Dave Calver. And I've got 100 to 200 things that are gallery work and editorial and advertising. And same on my own site in a more condensed version. Oh, and I'm in this book called 100 Illustrators that Taschen did last year. And it's a wonderful compilation of the best of their series, Illustration Now, and they picked their favorite 100 illustrators from that series and did this book. It's actually 2 books called 100 Illustrators, and they picked me, so I've got a section in that. And it's you can get it for $40 on Amazon, and it's pretty fantastic collection.
Awesome. So we'll get links to your website, and we'll also get a link to that book on Amazon, and we'll put show notes up for this on pencilkings.com/Dave Calver. That'll be DAVE-CALVER.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Dave. I really appreciate it. I had a smile pretty much the whole time. I was just grinning here, like kind of imagining what your career's like. And now, having parents, and they're in their little trailer park in Arizona, and I recently had visited Palm Springs, so I kind of can mash the two together and in my mind create this like funky little community. And I can see you can't hear it on the audio for those of you listening, but I can see Dave on screen right now, and it looks like his house is really cool, and he's got all of his art books behind him and some sculpture on the wall. So it seems like you're in a really great place, and I'm so glad that you had time to share your story with us today.
Oh, well, thank you, Mitch. It's a pleasure, and you've asked wonderful questions. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Sculpt demands patience, skill, years of practice.
You talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.
That's it for this episode. We'll be back next week with another fantastic interview with another successful artist. I'll see you there.